Federal Drive is presented by GEHA, Government Employees Health Association, proudly providing health and dental benefits to federal employees and their families. Visit GEHA.com.
Apportionments are a core but often overlooked part of how congressional funding decisions are implemented across the executive branch. A new analysis highlights how deviations from historical or statutory patterns can create downstream risks for agencies, programs, and oversight. Breaking down what to watch for is Cerin Lindgrensavage, counsel at Protect Democracy. Cerin, it is lovely to have you on the show. Thanks so much for joining me.
Very happy to. Thank you for having us.
Before we get into what you're showing on Protect Democracy's openomb.org website, I want to start with a grounding in the basics. What are apportionments, and what role do they play in Congress's funding decisions?
So apportionments are a part of the funding process that a lot of folks didn't used to care about because it just happened in the background. Nobody had to get involved. And increasingly, it is actually a part of the process that is front and center as OMB has been using and arguably abusing this authority to delay, withhold, and divert funding from where Congress has intended it to go. So apportionments are a part of the process for implementing appropriations bills that happens after Congress passes the law. So Congress passes an appropriations bill, goes to OMB, and before agencies can spend any of that money, OMB has to issue an apportionment, which is a legally binding document saying, here, agency, here is this money for either this quarter or this particular purpose or project. And once an agency has that apportionment, only then can they go spend that money in accordance with the terms and conditions of that apportionment.
So it's like getting the money actually in the agency's checking account before they can spend it.
I think about it a bit like an allowance. In 1870, Congress passed the Anti-Deficiency Act because agencies were having a really hard time sticking to their budgets. And they're like, we're making it illegal. You can't spend money we don't appropriate for you. And even after that, agencies were still having a hard time. So in 1905, Congress is like, okay, we're going to let the president put you on an allowance. You're going to get your money a little at a time or for specific things at a time. And that's the apportionment, is like the allowance that agencies get.
Your new website identifies anomalous apportionments. And so when you use that term, what kind of patterns or signals are you talking about?
So there's a few ways in which the apportionments we've seen in this last year, so the first year of the second Trump administration, are different from the past years of apportionments we have. The Congress passed the apportionment transparency requirement in 2022, so we only have a few years of data, but still there's some really big differences. The first is spend plans. There are old footnotes from past years where they say, hey, we're about to give you, say, $1 billion. You can start spending it after you send us a plan, which honestly seems pretty fair. Like we're handing you a whole boatload of money. Like you should probably send them a plan for how you're going to spend that. New style spend plan footnotes in the Trump administration, though, don't say just send us your plan. They say, hey, we're apportioning this $1 billion. You can only spend it consistent with the terms and conditions in an OMB approved spend plan, which is different because that could actually be holding up the money. There's a lot of things we don't know. We don't know if there's a spend plan. We don't know if OMB has approved it. We don't know if the OMB approved spend plan actually makes all of the funds available or puts in terms and conditions the agency can't work with, or maybe renders some of the funding totally unavailable. So Protect Democracy actually sued to enforce the injunction that under which the data is currently being made available. And the court issued an order on January 28th saying, hey, you need to include spend plans that are incorporated by reference. But the compliance with the order has been quite slow. And so we've only seen a few spend plans of the many that are being approved.
You walk through the ways that these anomalies can be identified in your website using publicly available data. So if folks are in an oversight role, say congressional staff or inspector general or even agency finance teams, how can they use that data and what should they be looking for?
Sure. So I should be clear, the spend plans are like one indicator. There's a few others. There's also footnotes that incorporate executive orders by reference. There's also other ways that OMB has been withholding funds, allocating it for unallocated purposes, pushing it off to the fourth quarter, even a Category C apportionment that pushes it off to future years. So there's 6 different indicators we sort of look for automatically each night as new apportionments come out. And so the anomalous apportionments are the ones where looking across those 6 indicators where we've seen there are likely some risks where the apportionment could be holding back, delaying, or even impounding the funds. We flag the ones that seem to hit on those indicators. It's not a perfect system. It doesn't mean that those apportionments are unlawful. It's just saying, hey, OMB is making these apportionments public, and this tool is just looking for those indicators. And so if you go to our site, Flagging Anomalous Apportionments at protectdemocracy.org, you can actually check to see if your agency or your program is on the site. You can check to see if a program that you care about or an agency that you're tracking funds for is actually seeing its funds upheld. So you can also see trends where there's, say, a bunch of Department of Education apportionments that are getting spend plan and executive order footnotes, and in some cases unallocated funds that the agency can't actually touch until those apportionments are made. And that can give you some idea of whether or not OMB is holding up funds at an agency you care about or for a program you're tracking.
I'm speaking with Cerin Lindgrensavage. She's counsel at Protect Democracy. Cerin, you talked a little bit earlier about the impact of the spend plans and whether OMB has approved them or not. Using some of these other flags, maybe walk us through a couple of other examples of how these anomalous apportionments are actually affecting what agencies can do. What are their practical impacts?
The practical impact can really vary by agency and program. So the first thing to do is, if you're tracking funds for a program or agency, go to openomb.org. You can browse by agency. You can do a keyword search. You could search for the public law number if you're looking for funds from a particular bill, and you can subscribe to updates. So go find the program you care about, go find the funds you care about, and see if there's an apportionment. If there isn't, subscribe to that account or that agency for updates, and then OpenOMB will email you the next time OMB takes an action, which is way more convenient than just obsessively refreshing it every morning. And when you do get the apportionment, check for footnotes. Check for A footnotes, which are legally enforceable in the Anti-Deficiency Act. Those are places where maybe OMB is holding up funds. Maybe they're saying, hey, agency, you have to jump through some more hoops. Check to see when the funds are becoming available. Is it right now, right away? Is it in a fourth quarter? Is it for a future year? And keep in mind that all the terms and conditions that OMB is putting in those A footnotes or in the bottom half of the apportionment where they're apportioning funds, those are all enforceable under the Anti-Deficiency Act. That has a range of consequences, from administrative penalties like getting demoted to criminal penalties like going to jail for 2 years.
Cerin, the framework emphasizes transparency as an early warning tool. You've talked about getting regular updates and posting all of this. Can oversight organizations, and I'm thinking here especially Congress, use the flags to identify and maybe correct course before this escalates?
That is certainly a hope. That is certainly one reason why we're trying to get the word out about the flags, because one thing that we've seen people do over and over the last year is when there's a concern about funds getting held up, people raise that concern with Congress, with the agencies. And time and again, we've seen that, especially when bipartisan concerns are raised, people can actually see effects in getting their money out. So we saw that last year with after school funds and the school improvement programs. We're seeing some troubling indicators that those funds might get held up. And when we saw in the data last year that there were similar holdups in the apportionment process, there was an outcry, and OMB released the funds. Same thing happened with funds for the National Institutes of Health. NIH funds at the end of July last summer were reported to be upheld by an OMB apportionment. The data was still not being published then. It was before we had gotten our injunction. But the outcry that happened on a bipartisan basis over the weekend, we can now see in the data, led to OMB taking out the footnote that was restricting those NIH funds. So we've seen time and again that if you raise concerns, especially if you raise them in time to be able to get the money out the door, you can actually get some movement. And you just have to know that you should be raising those concerns in the first place.
Walk us through your concerns about fourth quarter apportionments and how that might lend itself towards impoundment.
So when you have what's called a Category A apportionment for time for a particular quarter, you're saying, agency, you can't touch this part of the allowance until you get to that part of the year. So when funds are apportioned for the fourth quarter, OMB is telling an agency, hey, you can't touch any of the money for the fourth quarter until July 1, until you get to that fourth quarter. And in some cases, we've seen those apportionments and programs that used to get their money all at once. So like the Healthy Food Financing Initiative and the Ag Bill that was passed last fall, they got all their money apportioned for the fourth quarter, even though they used to get it all at once at the beginning of the year. Now, I'm not a healthy food financing initiative expert. I don't know behind the scenes what kind of problems that causes, but I could imagine that there's some problem for a program to be administered when they used to get their money at the beginning of the fiscal year, and now they have to wait till the very end and rush to get it out the door all at once. And so you have, I think, a concern that a few different things could be happening. One, you could GN the agency and force them to administer a year's worth of funding or a disproportionate amount of funding in that last 3 months of the fiscal year. So getting it all out the door all at once, that could cause problems. You could also imagine that folks who want to cut that funding might be able to use the delay while the agency cannot touch that money until July 1 to put it up for a rescission or to propose it as a reconciliation bill offset. That money can't get touched. And so if somebody were looking for a cut to make, it starts looking more attractive and easier to cut.
For agency finance teams or even the contractors and non-government organizations who work with government agencies, how can they use this tool as a regular budgeting tool, making sure that they're staying on track?
I would strongly recommend that if you care about federal funds for a program or an agency, go to OpenOMB and subscribe. Go look at 2024 and 2023 data to get an idea of what it used to look like when those programs were apportioned, and then look at 2025 and 26 to see what happened last year and what is happening now. Because you might actually have data that's publicly available that can tell you a story about what OMB is doing to make the funds available or to withhold them, and you just might not know that information is actually at your fingertips.
I've been speaking with Cerin Lindgrensavage. She's counsel at Protect Democracy. Thanks so much for joining me and walking us through this really helpful tool.
Oh, thank you so much for the time.
We'll post this interview at federalnewsnetwork.com/Federal Drive. Listen to the Federal Drive on your schedule. Subscribe wherever you get your podcasts.